Welcome to the Deep Dive. Whether you're a longtime listener or just finding us, you know our mission: to take complex information and break it down, dig into the fascinating details, and help you feel truly well-informed. If you appreciate that shortcut to understanding, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It's the best way to support us and ensure more deep dives come your way. Today, we are indeed taking another deep dive into essential vocabulary, specifically curated for those of you tackling challenging exams, like the postgraduate entrance exams here in China. We're working through Day 4, Part 2 from our source material, focusing on words that revolve around ideas of quantity, disorder, and another set related to action and desire.
That's right. And for clarity, when we refer to you, we're talking about examples taken directly from past year's exam questions. These are, well, invaluable because they show you precisely how these words are used in the kind of academic and sometimes abstract contexts you'll encounter on the test. The real goal here isn't rote memorization, it's building that intuitive understanding, learning words not just by definition, but by seeing them in action, analyzing their context, and understanding the network of concepts they connect to.
Exactly. Learning how a native speaker, through years of exposure, just knows when a word feels right in a sentence. We'll use those example sentences and as our starting point, our springboard, to explore the nuances, common partners, and even the subtle feelings these words convey. It's about truly internalizing the vocabulary. So let's unpack this set of words. We've got around 30 words on the list for this session, grouped under a few themes in our source. Let's start with the theme that dominates this list: quantity. And within that, let's start with words for the truly big ones. Our source material devotes significant space to words expressing very big or large quantity. This isn't limited to physical size. As you'll see, these words are frequently used to describe scale, degree, intensity, and amount in much broader, often abstract contexts. When you spot one of these in a complex sentence, it's often a signal that the concept being discussed is, significant, impactful, or extreme in some way.
What's fascinating here is looking at the spectrum of words that essentially mean huge. We have giant, gigantic, immense, tremendous, and enormous. While often interchangeable, paying attention to their typical usage and connotation helps refine your understanding and makes your own use of English more precise, which is, crucial for writing components of exams.
Let's start with giant and gigantic. Our source defines giant as both a noun, like a large company, a mythical being, a great person or beast, and an adjective meaning huge. Gigantic is primarily an adjective meaning huge, specifically like a giant. The core idea is clearly about size, far, far beyond what is typical or expected.
Precisely. Think of the giant screen example. That's the literal physical size comparison. A screen so large it's, like a giant. But then look at the do for giant. The power and ambition of the giants of the digital economy is astonishing. Here, giants is used as a noun, but clearly not referring to mythical beings or physically large creatures. It's a powerful metaphor for extremely large, dominant, and influential companies like, say, Google, Apple, Amazon, those sorts of players. It highlights how a word rooted in physical size can be lifted to describe abstract scale of influence, power, market share. This metaphorical usage is really common in academic and business writing.
Right.
It shows you need to be flexible in your interpretation and ready for words to take on, figurative meanings.
That's a key point, recognizing when the literal meaning shifts to something more abstract. What about gigantic? The example is, the bomb caused a gigantic explosion.
Yeah, pure physical scale, again, the explosion was enormous. But the do for gigantic takes us back to the abstract. Small choices now may turn out to have gigantic consequences later.
Okay, so how does that work? Consequences aren't physically big.
Exactly. This sentence is gold for understanding how these size words function metaphorically. Consequences aren't physical things you can measure with a ruler. So what does gigantic consequences mean? It means consequences of overwhelming scale, impact, and significance. They are far-reaching and profound.
Huge impact.
Huge impact. And analyzing the sentence structure, small choices may turn out to have gigantic consequences later, is also really helpful for reading comprehension. It sets up a cause and effect relationship. A seemingly minor cause, small choices, leads to a major effect, gigantic consequences. The adjective gigantic amplifies the predicted outcome, signaling its severity or broadness. It's not just about the word gigantic, it's about how it's used to express the magnitude of an abstract outcome stemming from an action.
Got it. Okay, let's look at immense, tremendous, and enormous. The source lists them also meaning very large. How do we differentiate these? Are they truly interchangeable?
Well, in many everyday contexts, yes, they can be used for similar meanings of very large or great in degree. But focusing on typical collocations, the words they often partner with, is a practical way to build intuition, as the source suggests. You'll commonly see immense benefits, tremendous amount of work, enormous cost, enormous influence. This isn't because the words only mean those things, but these pairings are frequent and sound natural to a native speaker.
And the due for immense. An abstract concept which makes possible immense amounts of concrete research and understanding. Here's that abstract connection again. Immense amounts.
Exactly. Amounts can be tricky. It's not necessarily countable items, but rather a vast quantity or volume. Immense amounts of data, immense amounts of effort, immense amounts of information. It conveys a sense of vastness, bordering on immeasurable quantity. And the derived adverb immensely, think of immensely useful, immensely difficult.
Extremely useful.
It means extremely useful, extremely difficult. It intensifies adjectives or verbs, showing a very high degree of that quality or action. It's a powerful intensifier.
Tremendous is interesting because our source lists that second meaning, wonderful or spectacular, like a tremendous experience.
Yeah, that duality is fascinating and a potential point of confusion if you only learn one meaning. Tremendous comes from tremor or tremble, suggesting something so big or powerful it makes you shake, sort of. So it can mean physically vast, a tremendous amount of rubble, or great in quantity, a tremendous amount of work. But it evolved to also mean awe-inspiring or wonderful because things that are overwhelmingly large or powerful can also be amazing or spectacular.
Right.
A tremendous success is a huge success, but also wonderfully successful. A tremendous storm is a huge storm. A tremendous achievement is a wonderfully great achievement.
So context tells you which one.
Context is everything with this word. If someone describes a view as tremendous, they don't mean it's a huge view, but a spectacular one.
And enormous. The cost of the work was enormous. Seems straightforward, large in scale or amount. These designers came to exert enormous influence.
Again, applying a word for physical size, enormous initially meaning outside the norm or monstrously large, to an abstract concept like influence. Enormous influence means influence that is very great in scale and impact. It's a clear pattern we're seeing. Words for physical bigness are linguistic tools for describing the scale, intensity, or impact of abstract things like costs, benefits, consequences, influence, problems, challenges.
Okay, that makes sense.
This pattern is fundamental to understanding complex texts. Like immense, enormous has an adverb form, enormously. Enormously popular, enormously wealthy.
Extremely popular.
Again, meaning extremely popular, extremely wealthy. These adverbs are nearly interchangeable in their intensifying function.
Let's try linking a few of these in a brief thought sequence, maybe about a large-scale project or event. Okay, imagine you're describing the challenge of a massive infrastructure project.
Okay. You might say the budget overruns on the project have reached enormous proportions, causing tremendous stress for the project managers.
Right. And the engineering challenges themselves were immense.
Absolutely. Getting that one gigantic piece of equipment onto the site was a feat of engineering.
See how they build on each other. Enormous proportions for the scale of the cost. Tremendous stress for the intensity of the feeling. Immense challenges for the vastness and difficulty of the problems. And a gigantic piece of equipment for physical size.
Yeah, noticing those patterns and pairings is part of building that intuition.
Moving from words meaning very big to words meaning very many or plenty, we have numerous, plentiful, abundant, and then words that describe large groups like flock, multitude, and mass, leading into massive.
Right. These all describe large quantities or numbers, but again, with nuances in usage. Numerous is typically used for things you can count, even if there are a lot of them.
Like numerous examples.
Numerous examples, numerous studies, numerous factors from the new. It's essentially a more formal or emphatic way of saying many.
Okay. Plentiful seems more about availability or supply, suggesting a large quantity exists and is easily accessible. Fish are plentiful, jobs were plentiful.
Yes, it implies a generous supply. Abundant is very similar to plentiful, often suggesting not just a large quantity, but a richness or even excess in supply. Abundant evidence implies a rich supply of supporting facts. Abundant fuel and lumber describes a rich, generous natural resource.
Yeah, okay, richness.
And the derived noun abundance captures this state of having plenty, often more than enough. An abundance of caution, a great deal of caution, living in abundance, having great wealth and resources.
What about flock? The source gives it as a noun for a group, birds, sheep, people, and a verb meaning to gather in large numbers.
Flock is a fantastic example of a collective noun that visualizes movement. As a noun, a flock of birds, a flock of sheep, or metaphorically, a flock of patients, many patients together. The visual is of a group moving or staying together. As a verb, people flock to the stores on Black Friday. It means they move to the stores in large numbers, like a flock of birds converging.
Adds movement.
It adds a dynamic sense of mass movement.
Multitude and mass also refer to large groups, often of people.
Multitude frequently refers to a very large number, especially of people, sometimes implying the general public or the common people as opposed to an elite. A multitude of stars, many stars. A whole multitude of problems, many problems, but look at the do. It was an elite that believed his task was to enlighten the multitude.
Oh, interesting contrast.
Yeah, this sentence structure clearly sets up a contrast between a small, privileged group and the large general population, the multitude. It highlights how these words can be used to describe social groupings or divisions within a society.
Mass can mean a large, indistinct quantity of something physically, like dark masses of clouds. But it's also used, like multitude, for a large number of people, especially the general public, often seen as a large, undifferentiated group, the story of the masses. And then it's used as an adjective related to scale, mass production, mass appeal, mass marketing.
Exactly. Mass production is production in large quantities. Mass appeal is attractiveness to a large number of people. And this leads us directly to massive, which derives from mass. Massive typically means extremely large, heavy, or solid. But like the big words, it's heavily used for abstract concepts conveying significant scale or impact. A massive heart attack, very severe and widespread damage. A massive investment, very large-scale funding with potentially huge impact.
Right.
About massive investment changing the picture quickly in economics shows how massive conveys not just large quantity of money, but significant transformative impact. The link between mass, quantity, lump, crowd, and massive, large-scale, significant impact is key. Massive problems, massive success, massive change, it conveys a sense of overwhelming scale.
Let's try putting some of these many words together in a quick scenario. Imagine describing a very successful, popular event. Okay. The opening of the new exhibit was incredible. The turnout was absolutely massive.
It really was. There were numerous people waiting in line long before the doors opened.
And once inside, you saw flocks of fans heading straight for the main installation.
The organizers were smart, though. They ensured there were plentiful guides available to help manage the crowd, and it seemed there was an abundance of information about the art everywhere.
True. Trying to navigate through the sheer mass of people at peak times was challenging. But with a multitude of interactive displays, everyone seemed to find something to engage with.
See how these words paint a picture? Massive for the overall large scale of the event, numerous for the countable people in line, flocks describing the movement of people in large groups, plentiful and abundance for the supply of resources, guides, info, the sheer mass for the physical density of the crowd, and multitude for the variety and number of displays.
Yeah, they all mean many, but differently.
They all relate to many, but in different ways.
Okay, let's move to words describing things that are extra, unnecessary, or excessive. Perhaps more than enough in a way that might not always be positive. Redundant, superfluous, extravagant, extravagance, luxury, surplus, addition, multiply.
Right. Redundant and superfluous both share the core meaning of being unnecessary or more than is needed, but they have distinct common uses. Redundant is often used for things that are repetitive and thus unnecessary. Redundant information that is repeated needlessly. Critically, for exams, it's very commonly used for people who have lost their jobs because they are no longer needed by the company.
Oh, that's specific.
Very specific. The source example is clear. The program organizes training for redundant workers. This is a key specific usage being laid off because your role is no longer necessary.
Okay, good to know. Superfluous also means more than is needed, but feels a bit more formal or intellectual. It often describes things that are non-essential additions or words. Words were superfluous implies words weren't needed to understand the situation. The do for superfluous is particularly thought-provoking. It is precisely these superfluous things that define human culture and ultimately what it is to be human.
Yeah, this sentence challenges a purely practical view of life. It argues that the things we create and value beyond basic survival needs, art, music, ritual, complex social customs, philosophy, these superfluous things are what truly distinguish humanity.
Things we don't need but define us.
Exactly. They aren't strictly necessary for physical survival, but they are essential for culture and identity. Analyzing the structure, it is precisely X that define Y, shows how this sentence strongly asserts that X is the definitive characteristic of Y. It's a common structure for making a central argument. Learning this sentence helps you see how a word like superfluous, which often has a negative connotation, unnecessary, can be used in a philosophical context to highlight something crucial to human existence.
Wow, okay, extravagant, extravagance, and luxury form a group related to excessive spending and opulence.
Yes, they're about spending more than is reasonable or necessary, often on non-essential things. Extravagant is the adjective. Extravagant homes, extravagant lifestyle, extravagant claims, claims that go beyond the truth, excessive claims. It implies a lack of restraint with resources.
And extravagance is the noun.
Yep, such extravagance is shameful. It's the state or behavior of being extravagant. Luxury is a noun for something expensive that provides comfort or pleasure but isn't necessary. A week by the sea is a luxury they can no longer afford. The derived adjective luxurious describes something full of luxury. A luxurious hotel.
All right.
That about fantasies of wealth involving extravagant homes links these ideas clearly. Extreme wealth is often imagined or associated with excessive, non-essential possessions.
Surplus means an amount that is more than is needed or used. It's both a noun and an adjective.
Right. A surplus of food, noun, means more food than is needed. Surplus stock, adjective, means stock that is left over. Any surplus will be sold. The do about having surplus vegetables and making soup gives a very practical, concrete example of having an excess of something physical and finding a use for it. It's about quantity that remains after needs are met.
Okay, addition means adding something or the thing added. Multiply means to increase greatly or the mathematical operation.
Addition can be a physical thing, like a room addition to a house, or something conceptual, like a new feature being an addition to a software program, an addition to the team. The derived adjective additional is extremely common and simply means extra or more. Additional costs, additional information, additional social stresses. It just signals something extra is being added.
Straightforward.
And multiply means to increase in number greatly or rapidly, often by many times. Costs can multiply quickly. Efforts to improve efficiency multiplied their profits. It implies a significant, often rapid increase. The Jews uses the derived adjective multiple. Brushing teeth multiple times a day means many times a day. So multiply, verb, increase greatly, and multiple, adjective, many, repeated, belong to the same family.
Let's try a scenario related to managing resources, maybe budgeting or business operations, where these words might fit. Okay. Looking at the quarterly report, it seems we have a small surplus in the budget this time.
That's positive, but we need to forecast carefully. We anticipate some additional expenses next quarter for the system upgrade.
Right. And we absolutely must avoid any extravagant spending. No approving requests for obvious luxury items unless they are absolutely essential for client impressing, not just comfort.
Agreed. We also need to review the new workflow process. Are there any redundant steps we can eliminate? Any superfluous tasks that aren't adding value?
Good point. Streamlining is key. The goal is for our productivity and revenue to multiply while keeping costs lean. We need to be efficient.
This scenario shows how these excess words work. Surplus, excess amount, additional extra, extravagant luxury, excessive not essential spending, redundant superfluous, unnecessary, and multiply, increase greatly. They all touch upon the idea of having more, whether positive, surplus, multiply, or negative, extravagant, redundant, superfluous.
Our source also includes hostile, folk, and host in this quantity section. As we noted earlier, based on the examples, their primary meanings don't seem related to quantity at all.
That's a good observation, and highlights that vocabulary lists sometimes group words for various reasons, not always strictly semantic. It's crucial to focus on the definitions and examples provided in your source material, as those are the meanings you'll likely encounter in the exam. Based on the examples, hostile is about attitude, unfriendly, opposing, showing animosity or resistance.
The examples confirm this. A hostile reception, an unfriendly welcome. Hostile branches, groups that are opposed to each other like branches of a political party. The derived noun hostility, lawyers generate more hostility, reinforces this meaning of antagonism and ill will. So despite the grouping, hostile is about opposition and unfriendliness.
Absolutely. Then there's folk. Based on the examples, this is about people, particularly ordinary or traditional people, or relating to traditional culture. Folk art is traditional art of ordinary people. Folks continuing to work. simply means people continuing to work.
So people or tradition.
Yeah, it's about people or cultural tradition, not quantity of things, although folks does refer to multiple people.
And host. The examples given relate to organizing or presenting. A party giver, a presenter, a country, holding an event. Ian, our host, the person entertaining guests. Hosting an event means organizing and running it. This is clearly not about quantity in its primary use shown.
Right. Now, it is true that the phrase a host of is an idiom meaning a large number of people or things, like a host of possibilities. Perhaps this idiom is the reason it's loosely grouped under quantity in the source. However, the detail entry and examples focus on the organizer-presenter meaning.
Okay.
For exam purposes, prioritize the meaning supported by the examples and definitions given. Learn hostile as unfriendly, folk as people tradition, and host as organizer, while being aware of the idiom a host of as a separate piece of knowledge.
Let's quickly use these unrelated words in brief examples based on their primary meanings, just to solidify them. Describing a difficult negotiation, things got heated, and they seemed quite hostile to our offer.
Or discussing a cultural event. They had live performances of traditional folk music.
And planning. We're looking for a venue large enough for us to consider hosting the regional conference there.
See? Hostile attitude, folk, culture people, host an event.
Yeah.
Very distinct concepts, reinforcing that context and example usage are paramount, even if words are grouped strangely in a list.
Okay, let's transition from abundance and quantity to the opposite state, disorder. Our source gives us mess, chaos, and disorder.
Right. These words are indeed closely related synonyms, all describing a state lacking order, neatness, or control. But they operate on a spectrum of intensity and formality and are used in distinct contexts, especially disorder. Mess is perhaps the most informal and often refers to physical untidiness, usually in a specific place.
The kitchen was a complete mess after we finished cooking. Or as a verb, try not to mess up the presentation slides. It feels everyday and fixable.
Yes, mess is very common for physical clutter or general untidiness. It implies something that is disordered but typically can be sorted out or cleaned. Chaos, on the other hand, implies a state of extreme confusion, disorganization, or lack of control. It's a much stronger word.
After the system crashed, the office was in total chaos. Everything was unpredictable and out of control. The do for chaos uses it metaphorically. Beethoven's music tends to move from chaos to order.
This is a beautiful example of metaphorical use. Chaos here describes an initial state of sonic complexity, perhaps dissonance or lack of clear structure, which then resolves into a harmonious, structured form, order.
From complex to simple, sort of.
Yeah, or unstructured to structured. It's not literal disorder, but a description of the perceived structure within the music. Analyzing this from X to Y structure shows a common pattern for describing transformation or progression, a journey from one state, chaos, to another, order. The derived adjective chaotic, a chaotic meeting, is very common for describing situations that feel completely disorganized and unpredictable.
Okay. Disorder is similar to both, meaning a lack of order, a room in a state of disorder. But the crucial meaning, especially in academic contexts, is its use for medical or psychological conditions.
This is a key distinction you must note for exams. While a room in disorder is like a mess, the term disorder is specifically used in medical and psychological fields to refer to an abnormal physical or mental condition.
Very important difference.
Crucial. The MOOM makes this clear. Controlling and operating them will result in a new psychological disorder. Here, disorder is not just messiness, it's a diagnosed condition. Analyzing the sentence structure also helps. It shows a potential cause, controlling smart appliances, leading to an effect, a new psychological disorder. So when you see disorder in a medical or psychological context, its meaning shifts significantly from general untidiness.
So quick recap. Mess for physical, everyday untidiness. Chaos for extreme, often widespread, literal or metaphorical lack of control structure.
Right.
And disorder for general lack of order, or specifically medical, psychological conditions. Let's use them in different brief contexts to highlight the difference.
Okay, if you walk into a teenager's bedroom, you might say, wow, this room is a total mess.
Simple untidiness. Okay, if the internet goes down globally, disrupting communication and travel, you might say, there was complete chaos at the airports.
Widespread, extreme confusion and lack of control. Exactly. And in a medical report, you might read, the patient was diagnosed with a sleep disorder.
Specific medical condition. Or you might link them. The unexpected emergency created disorder in their evacuation plan, leading to a chaotic scene.
Nice. Here, disorder's the general state. Chaotic describes the resulting situation. Understanding these distinctions is vital for accurate reading.
Finally, our source groups urge, haste, and hasty. These words seem to connect to motivation, speed, and the potential lack of care that comes with speed.
They do. They describe the impetus for action and the manner in which that action is carried out, particularly concerning speed. Urge has two primary uses based on the source. As a verb, meaning to strongly recommend or advise someone to do something, and as a noun, meaning a strong desire or impulse.
As a verb, the government urged citizens to conserve water during the drought. It's a strong recommendation, a plea due to the situation's importance.
Right. And as a noun, self-expression is a basic human urge. This is a fundamental, strong, often instinctual internal drive or need. The sentence structure, X is a basic human, Y is a common way to state fundamental human characteristics or motivations. The derived adjective urgent relates directly, an urgent message, an urgent need. It means something that needs immediate attention, implying a strong pressure or necessity to act quickly.
So the urge leads to urgent action.
Often, yes. The urge, noun, might feel urgent, adjective, or authorities might urge verb action because a situation is urgent. They're all connected.
Haste is a noun meaning speed or hurry, and it very often carries the negative connotation of doing something too quickly, without enough care or thought. He signed the contract in haste, implies he might regret it because he didn't read it carefully.
Exactly. It's the noun form describing the act of hurrying, and the implication is usually that this speed leads to problems. The derived verb hasten means to make something happen faster or hurry along. He hastened to explain his actions.
He quickly explained.
Right. They tried to hasten the approval process. They tried to speed it up.
And hasty is the adjective derived from haste. It describes something done quickly and without care, thus likely to be wrong or regretted. A hasty decision. She regretted their hasty words.
This word perfectly links the concept of speed, haste, to the potential negative outcome, haste a result. A hasty decision is one made in haste, and it's likely to be flawed because it wasn't thought through properly.
It had a feeling to it.
The connotation is almost always negative, implying rashness or carelessness. Analyzing sentences with hasty often reveals a cause and effect. The speed of the action led to a negative result.
So urge is about the pressure or strong desire to act, while haste and hasty describe acting quickly, often carelessly, as a result of that pressure or simply being in a hurry. Let's use these three in a final quick scenario. Imagine you're facing a deadline.
Okay. We have an incredibly urgent deadline for this project. Management is urging us to work through the weekend.
I feel the urge myself to just power through. But we can't let this project be completed in haste. A hasty job now will just mean more work fixing errors later.
You're absolutely right. A hasty deliverable could damage our reputation. We need to balance the urgent need to finish with the need for careful work.
Good balancing act.
This shows the connection. The deadline is urgent, creating an urge, both external pressure from management and internal desire, to finish. But there's the risk of acting in haste, resulting in a hasty, careless, likely flawed output. So, to recap, we've taken a deep dive into words from Day 4, Part 2 of your source material. We explored words for expressing different facets of quantity sheer size. Giant, gigantic, immense, tremendous, enormous, large numbers, numerous, multitude, mass, flock, abundance and excess, plentiful, abundant, surplus, and concepts of adding or increasing, addition, multiply, as well as unnecessary excess, redundant, superfluous, extravagant, extravagance, luxury. We also clarified the primary meanings of some seemingly misplaced words like hostile, folk, and host based on the examples provided.
Then we shifted to words describing states of disorder, from physical untidiness, mess, to extreme confusion, chaos, and general lack of order, critically noting the specific meaning for medical or psychological conditions, disorder.
And finally, we looked at words related to action and desire, the pressure or impulse to act, urge, urgent, and the speed of acting, particularly when it implies a lack of care, haste, hasty, hasten.
And throughout, we've tried to demonstrate that true understanding comes not just from memorizing definitions, but from seeing how these words are used in real sentences, especially those from you. Analyzing the context, spotting common partners, understanding derived forms, and seeing how words contribute to the structure and meaning of a sentence are the keys to building that intuitive vocabulary knowledge that will help you ace your reading comprehension.
Exactly. Connecting these words into semantic groups, seeing how enormously relates to enormous, hostility to hostile, chaotic to chaos, multiple to multiply, additional to addition builds a stronger mental network than learning isolated words. And understanding nuances between synonyms like immense, tremendous, and enormous, or mess, chaos, and disorder gives you precision.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into Day 4, Part 2. We sincerely hope spending this time exploring these words through examples and conversation has given you a much richer understanding than simply reviewing a list.
Remember, the next step is yours. Actively look for these words in the text you read, particularly in your exam practice materials. Pause and analyze the sentences they appear in. How is the word being used? What does it add to the meaning? Try using them yourself in practice sentences. This active engagement is where the learning truly solidifies.
Absolutely. Let us know in the comments below which word from today's deep dive did you find most illuminating, or which one feels most relevant to the text you're studying. Your insights help us and the entire learning community. If you found value in this deep dive, please hit that like button and share it with fellow learners. Your support makes a real difference and helps us create more resources like this. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.
Thank you.
And here is a final thought to leave you with, building on one of our fascinating sentences today. Consider the idea that superfluous things might actually define what is most human. In your own journey of mastering vocabulary for complex exams, you might encounter what seem like superfluous details, the subtle difference in connotation between two synonyms, the specific way a word is used metaphorically in a particular field, or taking the time to analyze the sentence structure around a word in a boom. These might feel like extra, unnecessary effort beyond a quick definition. But perhaps, just like those seemingly superfluous aspects of culture, it is precisely these details, these deeper insights, that define the depth of your understanding and ultimately make the crucial difference between simply knowing a word and truly mastering it for success. Something to think about until our next deep dive.